Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to talk a slightly different type of topic for us. I guess, Chris, we could call this History of the White House or something like that. It's a little different. Usually, we talk about an event or a person. This time we're talking about a building, the president's mansion, the president's house, the White House, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're going to be talking about today, the White House.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it is history. Because if you think about it, for over 200 years, the White House has been the symbol of the presidency. It is the seat of government. It has history. It's in the nation's capital. And I think it's, I don't know, when we were thinking about different topics and all that we needed to talk about, I kept going back to the intricacies of where government operates. Just thinking, have you ever heard that expression, if these walls could talk? Or I'd love to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Well, Ray, as a history nerd, there is just something powerful when you see up close and personal the White House. And it is very unique. It has powerful history. And no matter what you're doing, when you come across that building, there's just something nostalgic about it. And I think it's important that we understand that just like the people that reside in the White House, there's history with the White House. After all, you just gave it like 4 different names. And so it's important for us to take a little look and to see, because there's a lot of interesting things I think that we're going to look at from the time that it was found, and maybe we'll throw in a few trivia pieces as well as far as, what makes the White House so unique.
Yeah, it is a unique structure. It's, when you think about the United States, it's probably one of the iconic structures around the world. People around the world know the White House. They may know the Capitol building and that, but they know the White House. Don't ask people to identify the Supreme Court building or something like that, but the White House, they know.
Yeah, and we have a hard time remembering our physical address, but if you hear the word 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, White House.
Yeah.
I don't remember what my address is, but I sure do remember 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's like the seat of power. That's history. And it's pretty neat because it is the president's house. Also, Ray, as we go back to the very beginning, the person who helped construct it, he didn't even get a chance to see it, did he?
No, and that's one of the more interesting things. Joe Biden's the 46th president of the United States, and 45 of those 46 have resided for at least some period of time in the White House. I'm sure we'll look at a few that maybe had to move out for brief periods of time. But all of them, all 45 of those 46 have resided in the White House, at least some. But George Washington, who, capital city is named after, never lived to see the completion of the building, though he was the one, of course, that selected the location, not just simply for Washington, D.C., but also the location for the White House. He had a hand in drawing the layout of the city. And of course, there was the architect who was chosen to work on the White House, to design the White House, a guy called James Hoban. And Washington, of course, was very instrumental in selecting him. Washington laid the cornerstone of the White House. And I was doing some research some time ago, curious whatever happened to the cornerstone. They don't really know.
And it's interesting to me that this house, we talk today as far as, people submitting bids for, I'm going to submit a bid to build a house, or I'm going to submit a bid to complete this project, the school or whatever. And that's what they did here. The White House, they said, hey, if you're interested, submit bids. And I think there were like 9 proposals that were submitted, and all of these things were done, and it was a contest. And I'm not going to say it's this way in all contests, but if I'm not mistaken, Hoban was a friend of Washington, and I think Washington was pretty excited of some of the stuff that he had done. I think he was Irish, right? And I think
Yes.
Washington had seen
Yes.
something that he had done in Ireland, and so they were like, "Wow, this guy's really good." And this Irish-born architect basically says, "You're the guy." And so, in previous episodes, we've talked about how the good old boy network can kind of get you a long way. And I don't know if that was the good old boy network back during the day, but I do know that Washington, he got his man, just as he did in a lot of other circumstances, right? He got the person that he thought would do the best job.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, Washington did this work in 1791. The cornerstone of the building was laid in 1792, and it took 8 years to construct the original building. And John Adams, and we'll come back to this in a moment, but John Adams actually becomes the first president to reside at the White House in November of 1800. And of course, George Washington died December 14, 1799. So he missed it by about a year. Now, he wouldn't have been president, but I mean, he would, if he had managed to live another year or so, he would have lived long enough to see the White House. But of course, he did not live that long. It took 8 years to complete, of course, while the White House was being constructed, while Washington, the city, was being constructed. The capital of the United States had moved from New York City to Philadelphia, and it was going to remain there in Philadelphia until 1800, when it would officially move to the new capital. And of course, the White House would be opened and available to the president, who, of course, elected in 1796, taking office in 1797, was John Adams, and of course, his wife Abigail Adams. And it's there on November 1, 1800, that John Adams becomes the first president of the United States to move into the White House, to reside in the White House. And, when people think of the White House today, you think of the East Room and these very nice rooms, colored walls, decorative furniture. It wasn't anything like this. It was still under construction. It really was just at the point where he could just move in. He had been staying in a hotel there in DC. So it gets to the point where he's actually able to move in. They're still working on the walls. They're still, it's still very much under construction. In fact, Abigail Adams, I believe, remarks at one point that, she didn't like it. She said, you pretty much have to have fireplaces running in every room. She just did not like it. And, so it wasn't this grand building that we think of today. But I think John Adams, and I'll back this up here in a second, but I think John Adams understood what it could become, and ultimately what it did become, because he wrote a letter to his wife Abigail on November 2nd, 1800, and he says, like, he starts off all his letters to Abigail, he says, "My dearest friend," and he says, "We arrived here last night, or rather yesterday at 1 o'clock, and here we dined and slept. The building," he says, "is in a state to be habitable." He doesn't say this is a grand structure. He says it's habitable. We can stay here. But he goes on here and he says this. He says, "Before I end my letter, I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." Now, we could debate whether his prayer was answered, but this is, of course, the words of the first president of the United States to move into the White House. And he's not going to be there long, just a few months, because, of course, in the election of 1800, he comes in second behind Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, who tie in the Electoral College. But he's only going to be there a few months before he's booted out in 1801 by Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, I think I believe it was HBO, the miniseries Adams, does a really good job of showing a scene where Abigail and John actually go into the White House for the first time. And, anybody that's ever moved into a home where it's just completely empty, they do an excellent job kind of showing that. It's like pitching a tent in the living room just to try to make it. You're in the White House, but you have no furniture, you have nothing to make it. But I want to go back to something as far as the construction of the building, because I think this is history you didn't know but should. Uh, First of all, it cost about $232,000 back during the day. So I don't even know what that amounts to today. That's a lot of money.
Mhm.
But the other thing that is very unique about this is that the White House was constructed by European immigrants, also freed slaves, and also enslaved people. And so that we could go a long way with that, right? I mean, the seat of government, and the people that actually built it. Michelle Obama actually mentioned that in one of the speeches that she gave when her husband was president. She was first lady, just kind of bringing back to people's minds of who built this and the importance of remembering, what America has been founded on, the difficulties, the things that has gone on during this particular time. But, Ray, the other thing people are probably wanting to know is like, hey, you call it the president's house, and but it's also been called the White House. Why did they call it the White House? And there's a pretty simple answer to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It has to do, I believe, with Teddy Roosevelt, right? It was Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, actually, yeah, Teddy's going to
Now,
come and give the official name, but
it was
the
Teddy Roosevelt, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, because I didn't have this in my notes, but I believe Martha Washington, the house she grew up in, or a family house, was also known as the White House, correct? Am I right about that?
yeah, and the material that they used, it was this limestone, or excuse me, sandstone that had this limestone whitewash to it when it was constructed in 1798. And people were just like, oh, it kind of looks like a White House. And I mean, you go by. I mean, we do that today, right? Oh, that's a pretty blue house. That's a pretty White House. That's a pretty pink. Well, there's no pink houses. Well, I don't know. There might be some. But you go and you look at it, you say that's a pretty White House. And Martha, familiar with the White House, familiar with her house. You go back to Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon, the color of Mount Vernon, right? I mean, it was, and that was a very popular color back then if you didn't do brick, right? Because and that sandstone just gave a white hue to it. And I think that kind of leads to another point there, in that what is interesting about this White House is that each president, except for poor George, each president has the opportunity to express their individual style to it, right? They get to decorate that. And I think Thomas Jefferson really is the first one to do that, because, Abigail couldn't do it. John couldn't do it because they kind of moved in. And as you just mentioned, they moved out. So Thomas is really the one who comes in and hires another guy and says, hey, this needs to be the leader's home. This needs to look like something that is powerful, but also hospitable and welcoming. And, Thomas Jefferson held the first inaugural open house in 1805 and invited people to kind of come in. He did the swearing in ceremony at the Capitol, and he kind of said, hey guys, party at my house. And it was like, where's your house? And it's like, that's the White House. And so all these people just kind of walked in, and they had this big open house. And that's kind of where these public tours started. But he had that opportunity, right? Because it was the people's house, and he would welcome people. He would welcome people in. And I remember reading something that it got to be so many people there that basically what they would have to do is kind of like stop doing. I think it was Andrew Jackson, maybe, where they had like 20,000 that showed up to come in. Yeah, and I think they had like wash tubs with like orange juice and whiskey. They put it in like the lawn of the White House to get people out of the White House, because there were so many people there. So they put whiskey out and said, hey, come drink and you'll get out.
Yeah, Jackson had to escape out the back door of the building because it just got a little out of hand there. Poor Jackson.
They took him to a hotel or something, didn't he? And
yeah. But you're talking about Thomas Jefferson, the White House. He treated the White House very differently than what you would today. I mean, they say that if you had gone up to the front door of the White House and knocked on the door, then Thomas Jefferson might be the one that would answer the door. I mean, now, if you were to go up to the White House and knock on the door today, first off, as you very well know, Chris, you wouldn't make it to the front door. But if you by chance did get to the front door and you knocked on it, I guarantee you the current president, Joe Biden, would not be the one to answer the door, and the reception you would get would not be a friendly or welcoming one. Times have changed quite a bit since Thomas Jefferson answered the front door to White House in a bathrobe and slippers.
Absolutely, and that's the cool thing about Jefferson is he showed up one day in his slippers, and I do know all too well. I took a group up to see the White House, and I was with one of our former podcast presenters, Rodney Smith, who has been on our podcast before, and it was interesting. He was a little slower than I was, and so I'm just walking, and I get through to get to the White House, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all of these Secret Service agents just crowd upon Rodney and kind of block him in and stop him. And he's like, but they let Chris in. Why won't you let me in? And, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know him. He's going to be arrested. I don't know what's about to happen. But the reason all that security came in is because the House Speaker and the Majority Leader and Minority Leader, all of them were getting ready to come to the White House, have budget negotiations or something. So they closed the whole thing down.
That was the day President Trump, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer had that less than pleasant meeting in the Oval Office that got on CNN and everything. So you can't just go knock on the door. You can't even walk in. They have public tours, but I think nowadays they've even pushed people back further and further, and just because of the unfortunate way society is today. But and then Ray, it continues, right? You've got the presidents going in, but then there's this pause because America finds itself in the grips of another war. And in the midst of that war, the British are coming. And Ray, they have their sights set on one specific institution. Yeah, and they go after Washington, D.C. They burn the city, and in the midst of it, they burn the White House itself. And now the structure is not burned flat to the ground. It's really just gutted. And this is a point that I think we have to reemphasize over and over again when we talk about the White House, is when you go see the White House today, at least as far as the internal structure of the building, that's not original, because you had the fire during the War of 1814. Then you had President Theodore Roosevelt in the early 20th century, who did significant reconstruction on the White House. Of course, you had also Harry Truman doing significant construction on the White House. So the inside structure of the building, though it may in various ways resemble what it was, that is actually not part of the original structure. I assume most of the exterior is, maybe not all of it. Of course, the porticos, the front and back portico, have been added over time as well. If you see drawings of the original building, it did not have those things on it. So the White House, as it is today internally, is not the structure used to have. Of course, now we have the East Wing and the West Wing, the East Wing being the home of the office of the First Lady, and then the West Wing, of course, the famous Oval Office for the President of the United States. And of course, it was Theodore Roosevelt in 1902 during renovations that he had done at the White House, moved into the executive office and into the West Wing. But it was, but all of that was not part of the original structure. And of course, now we know there's all sorts of levels and stuff with the White House and things that weren't part of that original structure. So it's a very different building today than it was in 1812, 1817, whatever the case may be. So Madison, even though the White House does burn, he does spend time at the White House. He is a resident of the White House while he's president for a period of time. But it's not until 1817 that President James Monroe, did I say Monroe a minute ago?
No, you said Madison.
Madison. It's not until 1817 that James Monroe is able to move back into the White House. So again, 45 of the 46 presidents never resided. I mean, resided in the White House. Only one never did, and that was George Washington.
Yeah, and you mentioned as far as how this house has grown, and just about every president has put a touch on it, and a lot of them, you mentioned Madison, and you also think about Taft hired somebody, Jackson, Lincoln, but Harry Truman was probably the one who created the greatest renovation, if you will, of the White House. A lot of different things because there were structural problems, right? And so you start seeing him put in steel beams to kind of replace a lot of the other stuff that was starting to kind of go down. But Ray, it's interesting that after all of those renovations, that today there's 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, and what was originally designed to be 2 floors is now 6 levels with 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases, and 3 elevators. And because the president is such a powerful person, and also because he is in a bubble, there were some amenities that needed to be added to the White House. I remember one right offhand was when they added the pool to the White House. And the reason they added the pool was under the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt, and that was because he was polio stricken. And so he used the pool for rehab and for physical therapy and other things like that. But Ray, that's not the only amenity that you'll find at the White House, is it?
No, and you know what? Where the pool's not there anymore. It was in the West Wing. What's where the pool was? You know?
No, I don't know.
The press room.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, the media, I forget, what do they call it? Not the press room. What do they call it? I can't remember off the top of my head, but the
press briefing room or something.
The briefing room, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, they do have a movie theater, and I know this is wrong, but every time I think of the movie theater, I think of George W. Bush choking on a pretzel, because that's where that supposedly happened. I've never known anybody to choke on a pretzel and pass out, but be that as it may, I think they also have like a bowling alley in there or something like that. So,
Nixon had the bowling alley.
Yeah.
He was looking for a spare or something, and I guess Ford helped him out.
So yeah, they've added a lot. Of course, they've added the Oval Office, which was not, again, as part of the West Wing, was not part of the original structure. One of the more interesting things I like to talk about when I talk about the White House, Chris, happened in 1929 during the presidential administration of Herbert Hoover. Do you know about this?
Is that the fire?
This is the fire. So
Yeah.
President Herbert Hoover and his wife are holding a Christmas party. It's December 24th, 1929. They're holding a Christmas party at the White House. There's children there. I think the children are like children of employees or something like that. And they're in there reading Christmas stories or whatever. And somebody, I think it's somebody related to the Secret Service, discovers the attic. I think it's over the West Wing. Am I correct there? I think so. Was on fire in the attic. And actually, they had been storing like documents and papers up there. And these documents and papers just lit. And just like a forest fire, it went up. And the president himself, he's told about it. He goes toward the fire. Nowadays, I'm sure the Secret Service would grab him and run him away from the fire. But he is actually he actually runs toward the fire. But this is a major fire. 19 fire trucks, 19 engine companies, 4 truck companies, 130 firefighters descend upon the White House to try to put out this blaze. And of course, it does significant damage to the structure. And believe it or not, one of the more fascinating things that I find is the White House at the time was not insured. So they had to go to Congress and get a special appropriation to repair the damage to the White House because they didn't have insurance on the White House.
That's why you need insurance.
That's why you need insurance.
I don't know if we have, like, if Nationwide wants to be on our side and sponsor a podcast, or maybe Allstate, you're in good hands. I don't know if they want to sponsor the podcast, but we're accepting sponsors. But what is also interesting about that is the First Lady has a tremendous role in the White House. Of course, they have duties and things, but one of their main responsibilities is overseeing the layout of the White House, especially during special events such as Christmas. That is a tradition like any other, is when they decorate certain areas of the White House with all of these Christmas trees. And the Rose Garden, which was probably, I think I have this right, was Jackie Kennedy's, John Kennedy's wife's, like, masterpiece, where nowadays the Rose Garden is where a lot of main press conferences outside are held. And First Ladies have always put their stamp on things. Jackie Kennedy had the Rose Garden. Melania Trump, I think, revised the Rose Garden. Michelle Obama had an herb and vegetable garden. And, each of them come in and add a special flair to it. But they also hold state dinners where all of these people from, you've got ambassadors, you've got heads of state who come, and you've got to feed them. And so, of course, the White House has a kitchen that not only feeds the first family, but is also able to serve dinner to up to 140 guests. And that's like a 5-course meal. So we have a hard enough time at our house just taking care of ourselves. I couldn't imagine taking care of 140. And Ray, if they're just doing appetizers, they can serve 1,000 people. Where on earth do you put the people, and how do you feed that much? That's a job. But one thing that's really cool, Ray, is your president, the chef, is available 24/7. So if you've got a hankering for some ice cream, you want a cheeseburger, they can take care of you.
But you have to pay for it. That's what a lot of people don't realize. The president does not get free food. They have to pay for their dinners and all of that kind of stuff. That I learned that a few years ago, and that just shocked me. For some reason, I had always assumed that that cheeseburger the president wanted in the middle of the night was free of charge, but it's not. They have to pay for it.
So I wonder, how much does it cost, you think? You think they get a discount? I wonder.
I would hope not.
Because Bill Clinton and Donald Trump were famous for their love of hamburgers, right?
Donald Trump wanted to go to McDonald's and get his, what was it, the fish sandwich he liked?
Yeah, and Bill Clinton would jog there, to kind of make it feel like he deserved one. But if you think about that, you're not going to be able to afford a White House cheeseburger for $1.
No.
Because they're not using McDonald beef.
No, they have a full-time kitchen, they have a White House chef that's hired by the president. The White House chef is one of those positions that's generally apolitical. It's a career position, but presidents do appoint them. But White House chefs can stay on through multiple administrations. So you've got a chef, you've got a professional kitchen. I guess you have the best of ingredients, but if it's just for your own appetite, you got to pay for it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and it lends into an intimate look at the White House. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And in addition, they have those butlers, and they have the people that are always taking care of everything that is needed. And in a previous podcast, we were talking about, I think, Grover Cleveland, who 22nd, 24th president, they left and then kind of came back. And I remember, when you're talking about they stay on, is that the wife of Grover Cleveland looked at that butler and said, "Don't change a thing. We'll be back in 4 years." That was kind of like her farewell, telling them, just keep it like it is. We're coming back. And so that has got to be a very difficult job, because you hear a lot, you see a lot, You say it's apolitical, but I think in today's society, everybody is political.
Yeah.
And so trying to serve at the pleasure of a president who might not be the person you voted for, there's a lot there, right? But it's got to be one of the best jobs in the world, you know, and
well, that's true. I mean, not just of people who work in the White House, but pilots on Air Force One and Secret Service agents. They got to be able to put their personal views aside. I think I could manage to do that. We'll stop there.
History geeks about that.
I think
I'd be, man, that would just be living in luxury.
Yeah. Another thing I know, and this is thanks to Michelle Obama on one of the talk shows, she revealed this. Did you know people, and I got one more thing I want to cover before we close. Did you know the White House, they cannot open a window? Like, you know, you could open a window in your house and let the hot, muggy July North Carolina breeze in, or you can shut it and keep it out. But if you're in the White House, you cannot open a window, and you know you can't the first family can't just saunter down the staircase and go out the front door. I mean, there are rules that presidents have to, and the families have to live by. And you said earlier they live in a bubble, and they really do live in a bubble. Whereas, you know, presidents aren't allowed to drive, they can't open windows, they can't just go sit out in the yard. I mean, everything has to be mapped out, and of course, a lot of that security reasons.
Yeah, and I think to echo that, because President Obama was a basketball enthusiast, and there used to be a tennis court there, but he transformed it into a basketball court. And I guess what you have to do is reserve court time, huh?
Yeah,
you got to say, hey, because they have to shut down because there is a living, thriving, bustling city all the way around the White House. And so with all of the protection, with all the Secret Service, I'm sure you have to do that. But so, Ray, there's been all of these presidents, all of these first ladies, the iconic images of the children running up and down the halls. And I wonder, you think there's any like really cool ghost stories that might take place in the White House? You think I don't know. Do you think presidents have had some like weird vibes in there?
Funny you should mention that. It's so funny. Yeah, I think they have. And you know, it's funny that one of the ones that I sort of find the most amusing, of course, everybody knows about the Lincoln bedroom and the ghost of Abraham Lincoln and all this and all that. But there was one during the Taft administration, William Howard Taft, and we've talked about him both as president and Supreme Court justice on past episodes of the podcast. There was a young boy, seems to be about, they said 14, 15 years old. He was a ghost that haunted the White House during the Taft administration. And people said that they would feel him like tapping on their shoulder, you know, like someone like puts their hand on your shoulder, and that's how they knew he was there. And I think they called him the Thing, which is probably not very polite. But William Taft, President Taft, when he heard about it, he got so sick and tired of hearing about it that he threatened to fire the next person who he heard talking about it. You know, he was so sick and tired of hearing about it. It's basically, the next person I hear talking about this, you're out of here. You know, so, but yeah, I mean, there have been other ghosts, not just simply the Thing, but, you know, Abraham Lincoln, Lincoln's son, Willie Lincoln, who died in the White House, has supposedly been seen there. You know, Thomas Jefferson has allegedly been seen at the White House, and others as well, you know. So, and it's an old building, like we said, the cornerstone goes back to 1792. It's been occupied pretty much since 1800. So if there is such thing as ghosts, I've got to imagine they are there.
Yeah, and you know, we didn't even talk about all of the other aspects of the White House, you know, mentioning the Blair House. You've got the executive offices across the street, but all of the numerous tunnels and staircases and stairways. There's so many fascinating stories I go back to John F. Kennedy and a lot of talk about Marilyn Monroe visiting the White House on many different occasions through secret trapdoors and tunnels and things of that nature. So, Ray, I really enjoyed this podcast, and I think it might be setting us up to maybe just do some history of some buildings. The Capitol is another fascinating place to study because it is much larger than the White House, but it's got some really interesting stories in it as well, even ranging from blood on the steps to canings in the gallery to all kinds of things. So I don't know, Ray, we might have started something here.
Yeah, we'll hit the Capitol in the next episode.
Well, Ray, I want to thank you so much for all of your research and for always just bringing out those things you didn't know. And thank goodness you're still watching those TV talk shows because they continue to give you just wonderful information. So if there's any reason to watch TV talk shows, you listen to Ray on this podcast. He'll put you in the right direction. So, but before you tune into the next TV show, how about tuning in one of our previous episodes of History You Didn't Know But Should? We've got a lot of wonderful content that is out there, different topics, different people that we've covered. And we would encourage you, if you would get us a like, if you'll share with us a comment or forward out these podcasts to others who might be interested in learning some unique aspects about history. We're available on just about any podcast supplier, whether it's iHeart or it's Spotify, Sounder, Stitcher, Google Play. If you'll just kind of type in history you didn't know but should, you'll be able to find us there. And we would really encourage you to give us feedback. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, tell us what we can do to make the listening even better for you as you go out and continue to enjoy these episodes. So Ray, thank you. It has been wonderful, and I can't wait until we come back again another time. It's good to see you. Take care and have a great week.